too.
Did you have one?
I remember where they got them from.
Which one?
Those,
We'll call the Willmar City Council work session to order for Monday, June 19th. First off, is there any public comment? Seeing and hearing no comments from the public. The first item on the agenda is an amendment to the industrial park land write-down policy. Mr. Peterson.
Mayor Colvin, members of the council, the city council previously requested that staff take a look at the policy and offer amendments in light of recent activity by businesses wishing to
Bruce?
utilize that policy.
Your mic on?
Yes,
Can't-
it is.
can't hear any.
Okay.
The city's industrial land pricing write-down policy was adopted following the completion of the Willmar Industrial Park 4th edition. And the way the policy is written, it applies to both the 3rd and 4th editions, which are the latest two pieces of the industrial park, both on the east and west sides of County Road 5. Due to demand for the properties and the use of the policy, the council initiated the process to review the policy to see if any changes were warranted. And just as a starting point, staff threw out a recommendation that the policy be amended to state that the maximum write-down credited to the buyer cannot exceed 50% of the stated price. The question that I have is whether or not the change in the policy has the potential to make the policy less attractive to buyers. A 50% deduction in price is still a significant incentive and will motivate quite a few buyers, but to the extent we've had the interest, I don't know. From a financial standpoint, the city would write off a smaller portion of the value, and it would only be a negative impact if the policy, in fact, is determined to be an obstacle to sales of the property. So at this point, there's two alternatives, the way I see it: amend the policy or leave the policy as it currently stands. And again, I threw out a starting point for the council's discussion. I've had some discussion with the mayor and at least one other council person regarding different ways to deal with managing the availability of the write-down. And you can also have an impact by dealing with the wages. So I think somewhere in between is the answer, with the council looking both at setting some type of a maximum reduction in value under the write-down policy, and then working to amend the wage floor as stated, as required by the business subsidy law for the state of Minnesota.
So council, this is coming to our table because there was some question in regards to it. So are there comments that the council wishes to make? Councilmember Nelson, followed by Christensen.
Just a question, when you were looking at the 50%, did you look at other communities, or what did you base that off from? I mean, would it take us out of the market with other regional centers, or with what they are doing, or?
I'm glad you asked that question, because I went to the league research department to see what other communities do. They could provide absolutely nothing similar from other communities as far as land write-downs. And I know communities have done them. The only thing I can think of is they must do them rather informally, or they do them without a policy. But the league, surprisingly, had no record of other communities' policies. So the 50% was something I put in as a starting point for the council's discussion.
I just have a concern. I don't know what the right percentage is, but if it eliminates someone from having a conversation, is there a different way to look at it so that you can, negotiate or, with that?
Well, I think the council always has that authority. And if somebody says, I'm only going to create 10 jobs, but they're going to pay $100,000 apiece, do you want to give them more credit than the person that's going to create 15 jobs that pay $15 an hour? That's a balancing act the council's got to take on. My personal philosophy is that the vacant industrial park land does nothing. The only value to the property is its ability to generate tax base and employment. And this policy, as currently written, certainly does that.
But that statement you just made, that's kind of combining two policies into one, because you're talking about salary versus land, am I not correct?
Well, that's correct, and the reason I'm saying it right now, in order to qualify for the land write-down, they only have to meet the $12 per hour wage floor of our business subsidy policy. And I think that needs to be adjusted, but the council should have the authority and has the authority to cut whatever deals it chooses, as long as the deals are in compliance with the policies that are in effect. So you can certainly give greater weight to jobs that pay more if you wish to.
So should we be looking at those two policies together versus looking at this one and then looking at the other one, if they are, if in our consideration, the two play on each other?
Well, I was prepared to come back on July 3rd with a recommendation to adjust the business subsidy policy, the wage floor. The timing for the council is entirely yours. If you want to consider those concurrently, that's your choice. There are some ties. I think that they can be amended separately. They are just policies, they're not ordinances, so the council's got an adopted policy, and obviously I think there's more flexibility to a policy than there is to an ordinance.
One more question, I realize, so the league doesn't have information, but through economic development or somehow, couldn't we find out what other communities are doing?
I made some contacts through Edom and was not able to generate any positive responses there either. I can continue to do that.
Okay.
Councilmember Christensen, followed by Councilmember Fagerly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I like your idea, Bruce, the 50% off. After all, there is money already invested in that property. I don't know what the city has in there, as I think some of this was done under Lost, if I'm not mistaken.
Virtually all of it.
All of it? Okay, so, but there was still a cost to it, whether it was lost money or not, because that came from taxpayers also, and visitors to Willmar. But I think there needs to be something like this in place. Cannot exceed 50% of the value that we have placed on it. Just for the fact that there was tax money put into it to put the infrastructure in and the roads, and I know there's some value to it, but most companies that are coming in, if they're going to locate there or in Willmar Industrial Park, they've got the dollars to do it. It isn't a but-for test on this. And we do a lot of tax abatement out there. But I think the idea has a lot of merit, and I would go along with the 50% value, to not go less than that when somebody comes in. And if somebody's going to buy 2 lots, it would be, I think it would be the same, I'm assuming, yeah. So I think it's a great idea.
Councilmember Christensen, do you want to explain what you mean by lost, or would you like me to do that?
Local option sales tax.
Thank you. Thank you. Some people listening might not know what that is, so.
They might be lost, I understand.
Exactly, yes. Councilmember Fagerly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Bruce, we might need to be reminded how many acres we have there and how it's platted out and what the prices are for the lots, too.
Okay, in both the 3rd and 4th edition, I believe, and this is going to be a pretty rough estimate, somewhere around 130 to 140 acres remaining for sale, and might be as low as 120. I'd have to go back and run the math, but the pricing that the council used based on an appraiser's input was $1.25 a square foot as the listed price. And any of the concessions the city grants are based on that listed price. A company still has the ability to come in and not use the policy and sit down and negotiate a price with the city to acquire the property.
And then in the last year, we've had Dooley buy out there.
Dooley,
Bacchus.
Bacchus, Magnum, and should close with Bueller soon.
Okay, and then we have one company that has an option on a big
Yes. Yep.
site there. So, okay.
Dooley's have an option on an additional lot. Magnum has a right of first refusal on an additional lot. So there's some speculative additional growth in the waiting in the wings out there.
I think, doesn't Genio have some?
Genio has a significant right of first refusal.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Schwantes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is, what's the ultimate goal? And if our goal is to expand businesses, whether it's existing businesses or new businesses to our community, create new jobs at a good wage, whatever that is defined as, and to build our tax base, then I wonder if this is really what we want to do. And I also wonder if this is the right tool, if the industrial park write-down policy is the right tool for us to adjust. As I've listened to past councils, the comments have been more about the wage that is being paid by the companies. And I think that we can address that through making an adjustment to the business subsidy agreement or the policy. I would hate to see us find ourselves in a situation where we're competitive with another community, and I, within the last year or so, toured a community's industrial park 60 miles away from here, and they referenced this land was given to this company. The city gave this company this land. So it certainly is happening, and that's what we're competing against. And, you know, I think that if we had a bond that we had to cover, had to pay back because of the infrastructure that was in the industrial park, that would weigh differently. Yes, it's taxpayer money through the local option sales tax, but this is a great tool for us. I think that the activity that we're seeing in the industrial park is very exciting, and I personally would rather see us continue on that kind of a track than to all of a sudden create barriers that weren't there before. I don't know what kind of transactions are in process or discussions that have been happening with other companies to date, but it's not unusual for some of these things to take an extended period of time. I wouldn't want to change a policy that would affect those conversations that have already been taking place. I think that I would prefer if we left the policy as it is, allow the council to make that decision. I would also prefer to not have a policy that we made exceptions to on a regular basis, because then what's the value of having that policy? If we think that we're going to want to make an exception for a special transaction or, you know, multiple ones, that doesn't feel quite right to me. So I would prefer that we not use this tool to answer the concerns that might have been out there, but rather address it with the right tool, and I think that's a business subsidy policy.
Mr. Backman, are there comments you'd like to make?
Yes. Marv and the rest of the council members, I appreciate the efforts that Bruce has been doing on this. A couple of things. We do have several proposals out for prospects under the current policy. And the last thing I want to do is go back to those prospects and say, sorry, we were wrong, or we have to change what we're doing. Second observation is that the business subsidy policy for the city of Willmar speaks to $12 an hour. That's been the policy for a number of years. That certainly could be looked at as well. It's really ultimately the decision of the council as to what we would like to do in terms of the land write-down policy. One additional observation is that right now that price of that land is even across the board. And in my experience, and Rick probably knows this pretty well, is that prices vary depending on location. When I was down in Wyndham, I adjusted the prices up or down depending on the location within the industrial park. So if something was at the end of a cul-de-sac that had a small entrance, there would be a deduct. If somebody was on the corner and had a visible location that had multiple access points, that price would go up. So it's something to bear in mind. I'm not trying to say what the magic number should be, but I think you take into account what the conditions are of those lots. And in terms of the number of acres, there's prior to the most recent transactions that are ongoing, we had about 151 acres that was available in the third and fourth edition, so we're probably right around 137 or plus or minus. So.
Thank you. Next, we have the issue, I'm sorry, Councilmember Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Lady called me this afternoon and said, what are we giving away tonight? And I'm here just representing the constituents in my ward and the city. And I hear it a lot out there, that these write-downs and our business subsidies, how much, I'm all for them coming here and giving incentives also, but they got to be fair. They got to be fair. I mean, we and the rest of our constituents are paying the value that's been assessed by the county, our property taxes, and then these big companies, they come in with millions and hundreds of millions of dollars, they get the biggest breaks. This is not just in Willmar, the county, it's across the country. They all get the big breaks, and the little guy just doesn't get it anymore. We don't even see them coming to us. There's a lot of small businesses out there that have been in Willmar for 50 years plus that haven't gotten any break from the city. And as a matter of fact, nobody's even been at their door knocking on them and say, what can we do for you? Now, I know the chamber has a program where they go out and talk to these businesses. The first ones they hit are Genio and the hospital and utilities. Again, I'm speaking for the little guy out there that says, what are we giving away tonight? You know, there's a fairness to everything. And I think 50% value of that property is fair. I think it's fair, and I don't think somebody's not going to come here because we have a very aggressive planning and development company, and we've got Aaron out here going after business, and they're both successful. And I don't think they're not going to come here because of that 50% threshold. I just do not. Again, I'm speaking for people that have talked to me about this, and I think it's very fair, the 50% threshold. I don't think there's anything wrong with it at all. I know that Aaron and Bruce want the best tools they can have in their box to go get these businesses to come here, but I think the 50% threshold is fair, and maybe we should hear from others on this, but I think it's fair.
John?
Councilman Meske.
The 50% to me is very much tied, though, to the other policy of wages. I mean, I almost need to see those side by side, because to me, the wage issue is a bigger issue. I mean, if you can make that floor move up significantly, I wouldn't even need to touch this policy. So to me, they're sort of married. I'd like to see the other one first before we move into here, because without moving wages up, I think that should be the qualifier of even being able to be eligible for the program, to be quite honest.
I would agree.
Councilmember Nelson.
I'd like to see us compare both of them. I stated that before, but I do think we have a responsibility to the citizens who paid the local option sales tax, did it to help create that industrial park. So I think it's our job to make sure that it now gets turned into tax-paying land. And I think we have to be proactive to do that. And so I really would like to see us keep the toolbox full of options for the right things to come along with reason. I mean, we have to do it for the right reasons, but I don't think we should put limits on it before we have the options to look at them.
Mr. Peterson, I think what I'm hearing the council say is they want to look at these on a side-by-side, and then maybe what we can do, Mr. Holland, is have both of these items on the regular agenda for in 2 weeks. I won't be here at the meeting, but just so that we have both of those side-by-side so the council can deal with them both on one night. So I think we could do that, if that's okay with the council. Okay. Councilmember Nelson.
I think Kathy brought it up too, and I would like to hear from some others with what other communities are doing, because I do think, you know, that they're working other communities are working very hard to get businesses there. So how do we compete? And what are they doing with that?
I think Mr. Holland will make sure we have that report for us. Next, we have change in Sunday liquor sales law. Our city attorney, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. I gave you an update a couple months ago to let you know that the legislature had changed the law to allow Sunday off-sale of intoxicating liquor. At that time, I let you know that you didn't need to do anything to your city code to become consistent with state law, because you just referenced statute in your code, that without doing anything, Sunday sales would become legal in Willmar when the new law takes effect on July 1st. And that really the only ability the city had, if it wanted to be more restrictive than state law, would be to be more restrictive about what hours on Sunday or any other day sales of off-sale are allowed. They did not have the legal authority, for example, to pass an ordinance prohibiting Sunday sales. Since I gave you that update, the legislature made another change to the statute, this time to give cities that authority. So you now do have authority, if you so wished, to prohibit alcohol off-sale sales on Sundays. Again, if you don't have any desire, you don't need to take any action. When the new law takes effect on July 1st, under your current code, off-sale will be permissible in Willmar on Sundays. So that takes effect July 1st. The only policy question before you is if you want to allow that or make a code amendment to prohibit it.
So council, we're getting this update because there's been a change in the statute. Does any council member wish to speak to this issue? Councilmember Schwantes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it would be really interesting to hear what our liquor stores' desire is. You know, when it was going through the legislature, there was a lot of conversation about it being causing difficulty for the smaller home, locally grown, locally owned liquor stores. And so I think that might be interesting feedback to get from them. Do they want it to be open on Sunday, or do they not want to be open on Sunday? Might be worthwhile to get their feedback.
Mayor, would you like to have us do an informal survey with those that hold the permit?
I can't imagine there are that many licenses in place to
No.
need to contact people.
We can do that, and then I'll send the results out to the council and the mayor.
So you could do that and then potentially place it on the agenda then if there's action that needs to
It
be
doesn't
taken.
have to be on the agenda. I can just send it out as FYI information once we get it completed. And then
Correct, but if it's showing that the people that we survey want a change in it,
Sure.
then it could move directly to the agenda, it wouldn't have to come back through work session.
if the council so desires, sure.
Correct. Councilmember Nelson.
If we're going to do that too, then I would like to see us take the opportunity to look at statistics from the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and if we would put restrictions on what we might be doing, so we don't end up with a Minnesota-Wisconsin kind of issue, which is why the state took us to this, that we would have communities around us, because the tourism and conventions, I think, have been lobbying for this. So I think if we're going to research our community, then we need to research the other side of that too, so.
Are you saying research the surrounding communities as well?
No, I'm just saying if we're going to look at just polling the liquor stores to see what their plans are
Right.
for that, I think there was a reason that the legislature voted this year on this. And so I think before we would put restrictions on the city of Willmar, we should probably be looking at those too.
Okay. Okay.
I know as the mayor, I was not asked what my opinion on this was, but I think the legislature just did whatever they felt they wanted to do. I think it's another example of St. Paul telling Willmar, Minnesota what they're supposed to do. And personally, that doesn't feel good to me. So I appreciate the fact that we're going to ask our constituents what they want to do, and then let that be the guiding principle and bring that back to council for a decision. So, additional discussion? Okay, hearing none. Consideration of unexpended capital funds. Mr. Okens.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, included in your packet on the committee action form is a description of the capital funds that are available to the city as of 12/31/2016. The $1,470,000 are unspent projects from 2016. Of that dollar amount, $106,000 is unappropriated and will be given to the mayor during the budget process for 2018 as available funds. The other projects listed there are either projects that have been committed or in process, The last page of your handout gives you the activity of what was originally budgeted versus the balance that's showing there. There's a couple items there that you see that or council action has amended those numbers. One was for the City Hall safety project, and the other is for the airport gate project. The 2017 capital is a little over $7 million. A lot of those dollars are, the main part of that project is $3 million plus for street improvements, which are committed and are restricted for that purpose. The other two projects that would be somewhat restricted would be the lift stations for the waste treatment plant, as well as airport projects where there are matching funds from either the federal or state government. Included in your packet then is a report in a format that has been provided to the council in the past, listing that $7 million, which consists of capital improvements, vehicle replacements, and again, as I mentioned, the 2016 projects that have not been completed. With that, Mr. Mayor, I'd answer any questions the council may have.
So, Steve, is there any place, and I read the report a couple times, and there's a lot of pages to go through, and I didn't print it out, so I couldn't look at it side by side. Is there any place in one area, I see the 106,000, but is there any place besides that that tells us what hasn't been appropriated or committed of the dollars either from 2016 or 2017?
Yes, in the pages of the attachments that are attached on the $7 million, approximately 400,000 of that has been spent to date. And that's due to different things projects that are just starting, like the street project. The council's approved that budget, but there's been no estimates submitted as far as payments go and that type of stuff. So on the current year, on the 7 million, the attachments would show that. Same as.
Can you tell me what page that is, please? And then, once the dollars are committed, such as the fire truck, so we had the one fire truck for 600,000, we had the other fire truck for about 40,000. Those, I think the fire truck, the $40,000 fire truck is here, correct? But the 601 is in process, right? And that order has been signed?
Yes, that's correct.
So those are appropriated dollars, so I think what I would like to see is the amount of dollars that are available that haven't been committed yet by the council. And at our last meeting, we had our improvement hearing, and at that, it told us what we had committed for that project. And of course, that was reduced from what we originally had talked about doing. But
Those commitments are recorded when our office receives copies of the contracts and/or our documents. In the instance of the large fire truck, we have not received any invoices at this point, and so those commitments aren't there. But we certainly can record them. Normally, the contracts are recorded when they have been invoiced or the first invoices have been implemented. But we certainly can record that as far as the fire truck and those types of items. But I don't know if our office has received those documents yet at this point.
Okay.
If you look at page 8 of your that shows you on the vehicle section of the capital improvement report. On the current year of 1.1 million, 117,000 have been committed as far as our office and paperwork getting to our office would show, and that would show 990,000 remaining. On the 7 million you asked about, that would show up on page 10.
okay, I don't have a page 8 or a page 10.
No. No page numbers.
I do.
If you look at the top portion of your, I'm looking at the number. There's 40
Oh, you're talking our packet number, not the document number, okay.
47?
Yep, yep. Okay, Councilmember Nelson.
I was also curious if there's a way to show, and I'll just use the grass rig, shows that we had $60,000 in the budget. Year-to-date has been posted 47,932.17. Is that a closed-out item? So is the $12,000 left, or are there still other bills? Isn't there some way on a spreadsheet that you could still show open?
The departments would have to notify us once the projects have been totally completed. Our office wouldn't know that unless the departments have notified us. An example would be, there was a project at Public Works where there was, I think, a pressure washer purchased, and the installation price came in later. So, I mean, we would need to know from the departments if the project has been completed, but we certainly can require that of the departments when they submit their bills to be paid, that this is a final bill.
And one other question too, so for example, when we ordered the fire truck, we now are obligated, are we not, to purchase it? So we approved the purchase of it, so why wouldn't, in accounting, it be available to show that it's in process and that this money has been committed to that?
I think what I heard the finance director say was that he has not yet received that paperwork from the fire department.
Well, I don't know
Well,
if the fire
the
department would be there
invoice.
or the administrator's office, if the contracts have been signed. I guess we would have to see if those documents have been communicated to finance.
Okay. Yeah, I know I signed the document, so.
Okay.
Additional questions? Okay, this was, Councilmember Metzger.
How difficult would it be to do a rider on a purchase to say when they are finalized?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Well, I mean, the concern is people, we don't know when these are final payments are there, and you say the department chairs don't let you know, but if we could just include that, how difficult would that be?
We
To
could-
just simply say when an item is completed?
We certainly can change that procedure. That's not a difficult
It's not a
item.
big deal.
Plus, we can work on getting notifications of contracts and stuff in that whole procedure of our office receiving them.
Seems
If
like
that's
a
a
very good
concern.
idea.
I think what the council was asking at the retreat was that we wanted to know the dollars available, so that if the council chose to make some decisions, move some dollars around, we wanted to know what had been spent, what's in process, and what hasn't been spent. And that'll be particularly true when we have our next planning retreat in July. So, Councilmember Metzger.
Well, that's why I understand that, but if use the grassed rig, if those $12,000 are there, we would know that had we this procedural piece in place where we knew that that was a final number. So, I mean, I think that's an important piece. If you don't have that, it will continue to be a moving target. Once you know they're final, then you just subtract, and whatever's left over, we have.
Mr. Mayor, the procedure in the past, and we certainly can work on changing that, is that we can mark that as a final. If we're notified up in finance that there are no more small bills or any bills coming in, that's not a problem. The procedure in the past has been that those dollars then are provided to the mayor at the end of the year for the next budget cycle. But I understand the council's concerns about being able to take $12,000 or whatever the dollar amount is remaining and appropriate it during the year. It's just procedurally has always been the following year, same with operations.
Councilmember Osmus.
When you guys have your department head meetings every week, isn't something like this discussed then? If you would go down some of the major purchases and where you're at, what's left to do on it, that it wouldn't just be left in limbo?
Mr. Holland?
Mayor and council, on the meetings, right now, we do not cover the finances, but generally, I go to each department on a monthly basis, which we just started, and I sit down one-on-one with them, and that is when I can go through their budget, and I can say, you had 2 trucks you were going to buy this year. How come you haven't bought those yet? Oh, you're waiting on this or that. And so that's when I kind of get a feel, and we're kind of in a transition right now as far as finance, and I haven't worked with the departments on how I want that reporting to be done, whether it's monthly or quarterly. But as I get more and more familiar with each department, whether it's the projects, for example, I got a whole education today when we talked about the $7 million, and $3 million of that was allocated already for street projects and the other large projects. So as I get that more information, and I talked with our finance director today, that during the conference I just attended this last week, we talked about communicating to the general public how we spend our money and our budget. And I expressed at that conference that we should be able to express our budget orally within 15 minutes or less, and so to the public. And so that's the kind of breakdown that I expect to get. It'll be big picture, but it'll be simple, and everyone should be able to understand it. Right now, I think that we get too much in the weeds, but we will start to not only generate information for this body, but for the community as a whole, so that they can see how we spend the money and also how we get the money in, so that they can understand what portion is their money, what portion is grants, and so forth, and loans. Thank you.
I look forward to that report. I think heard some really positive comments about that in that process and that notification to the public, so really looking forward to that. So, and you know, we understand that you've only been with us a month, and it takes a while to get on board, and you're doing a great job. We're not being critical here. We're trying to be supportive, but we're asking questions that we haven't gotten answers to in the past, and we're trying to get to those answers. So thank you for helping us with that process.
Well, thank you, Mayor. And I just want to assure everyone that there is going to be change, and as I present, you know, the methods that I've used in other places, it's not to say that we can't tweak those to fit, you know, Willmar, you know, and the community, so that they understand that too. So look forward to it.
Thank you. Next, we have consideration of replacement of squad cars. Now, this issue is coming to us because the expenditure is over the $25,000, and so when there's an expenditure over that amount, it's a requirement to come back to council. So I had some questions from a couple council members today of why are we talking about this today? That's the reason for it. So, Chief Felt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Item before you for your consideration tonight is replacement of some police vehicles for 2017. We've identified 5 vehicles in need of replacement. There has been money set aside in the vehicle CIP for these vehicles, and just looking for approval to place an order for them. One thing to be noted that I put in my council action report here, the financial impact, originally on the 5 replacement vehicles as $197,524. My understanding is that there's actually $207,415 that's been put into the vehicle CIP. When I initially brought that dollar amount up to our sergeant that takes care of the vehicles and upfitting and everything, my initial number, a bead of sweat appeared on his forehead, and he was going to do his best to try and make it within that. We are going to be a good financial stewards, you know, with the whatever funds are designated to us, but we do ask that amount that was in the vehicle CIP, the $207,415.
So a question for you, Chief Felt, is that one of the vehicles was demolished in a rollover this either last winter or early spring. Correct. And so those insurance dollars that came, was that a vehicle that was in the fleet, or where did that vehicle come from originally?
It was. The vehicle originally came to the Willmar Police Department as a forfeiture vehicle. When Chief Weifels was here and part of the vehicle committee, that was, it was like an extra vehicle at that time. They got rid of a different vehicle. That one became one that was going to be on the regular replacement schedule once it was not being able to be driven anymore. So.
Okay, and so then, were there any insurance funds that came back from that vehicle crash? Because we have insurance on all of our vehicles, I would assume.
Yes, there was. It was a salvage price that came on that. That had to be split because it was originally a forfeiture vehicle, split between the state, the county, or the city attorney, and then to the police department, and the police department share of it was a little over $1,000.
And so then was your budget adjusted for that, or did your main budget, the 207, was that what you had in the capital originally?
That was what was in the capital originally.
Thank you. Council, you have any questions? Councilmember Fagerly?
So are you going with Ford Explorers again, or?
That would be, out of the 5 vehicles, we are looking at 3 of the Ford police utilities type. Again, we found they've got very good service records. In fact, the original replacement plan for most of our squad cars was 3 years. We've had good service records with those and planning to switch those to a 4-year rotation. One vehicle that we're looking to replace is one of our community service officer vans. We're not sure if that's going to be a van or a small pickup or whatever can fit into the budget. And then replacement pickup would be another pickup of some kind for a winter backup, something big enough to haul evidence or other items.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have consideration of the violation of the stormwater requirements. Our Public Works Director, Mr. Christensen.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. This particular item has been a long time coming, and so I'll just read a little bit of this history. It is in front of you. I'll fill in a little bit as we go and then answer any questions as we get to the end. So July 13th, 2016, the city was notified by MPCA regarding a citizen concern of what they call turbid water discharge into the city-controlled ditch. What the citizen actually was complaining of is, what they called MPCA with, was wastewater being dumped directly into the ditch. Actually, I think the term they used was sewer. This coming from a site that didn't even have sewer on it. So the problem is when you make that notification to MPCA, then red flags go up. So we, following that notification, the MPCA did a full SWIP audit, so Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, which is what that stands for. They did a full audit on the city and all of our projects, construction projects, policies, procedures, checklists, written procedures, and then post-construction, they did everything as far as that goes, and our minimum control measures. These measures include public education and outreach, public participation and involvement, illicit discharge detection and elimination, construction site stormwater runoff control, post-construction stormwater management, and pollution prevention, good housekeeping for municipal operations. Following the audit, the MPCA sent a draft stipulation agreement. This is back in February of 15th of this year. City staff has had several in-person and conference call meetings with the MPCA to negotiate the terms of this agreement. There was a number of alleged violations within the agreement. I can't remember the number, 16 or 18, I want to say, number of different violations that they were alleging that we weren't following. And so under current circumstances, staff has presented as much information as possible to counter the violations the MPCA is alleging. The MPCA has agreed to reduce the penalty to $18,500, down from $25,785. So the recommendation would be to authorize signatures on the stipulation agreement and for the council to direct where to pull the $18,500 penalty from, which budget line item. And then under alternatives, I've got, obviously, we cannot approve the stipulation agreement, but been informed that by doing that, we risk facing what they call administrative penalty order that may result in harsher penalties and shorter compliance windows.
Thank you. I know this has been a long time coming, so I remember when we first got this notification, it was concerning at that time, and this is another example of government overreach out of St. Paul, in my opinion. I think that they put rules on that are unreasonable for cities, and they certainly do not allow for us to have an opportunity to say why what happened, and then certainly have some empathy with us, particularly when we were short-staffed through that period of time. And this doesn't seem to be much of a reduction to me, but I'll be quiet and let the council still talk if they wish to. Council, any questions? Councilmember Nelson.
Just a question, if I understand correctly, this, where this occurred was on the is on the construction site of the school. Is that correct?
The circumstance listed that prompted the audit was from the construction site of the school. However, when they did the audit, they went through everything from our original MS4 designation as an MS4 community to our SWIP plan, to our comprehensive watershed management plan. They went through everything when the audit got started.
Okay, so was there any construction fault on the site that caused this to happen, that we would have any recourse with the school?
No.
No?
No, what happened was, it was a construction runoff pond, construction stormwater pond. The bank had, due to a rainstorm, believe it or not, this was prior to the August rain we had last year. Obviously, I got the July date on there. The bank was breached, and it so happens that within probably 30 minutes of the phone call and the bank breaching, we had a staff member happen to drive right up, and then saw it and drove up to the construction trailer, and they fixed it within an hour or 2 hours. So everything was taken care of, which was quite disturbing when they kept pointing to that during the audit.
Councilmember Meske.
With all the things that were listed here, if MPCA came in today, have they been corrected, or would we be cited again, do you think?
Members of the council, these things are generalizations of what's in our permit, and they went through everything in that permit with a fine-tooth comb, and that's where the violations came from. Most of the violations have been corrected already. We've in the course of the negotiations, have already started working on some of the things that they are alleging as violations. There are a few that are still being worked on and not complete yet. For instance, the big one that they hang their hat on was updated stormwater ordinances. Ours are not, and so that'll obviously, you guys will see that again. But we've set the window of compliance out there to, I think, November 15th to counter all of the violations, or to fix all the violations. And I would say at this point, a majority of them are complete or nearing completion.
Councilmember Alvarado.
Mr. Christensen, now, what stormwater, what was that? I didn't catch that word you said, coordinates?
Stormwater
Yes.
ordinance, that's correct.
Ordinance.
Yep.
Okay, I didn't hear you, I'm sorry, okay. That's all, thank
Maybe I
you.
stuttered, sorry.
No, you did fine.
And again, Councilmember Alvarado was addressing our Public Works Director, Mr. Christensen. You know, the thing of it is, I think that's really peculiar here, and really causes me as the mayor to pause for a minute and think about this. The new regulations that the MPCA is putting on us, if you took a glass of water from your faucet and you wanted to take it out to the wastewater treatment plant and dump it into the discharge, it would be in violation, folks. That's the rules and how stringent this is becoming. This is absolutely ridiculous. And here's another example of the MPCA and their government overreach that are making things impossible for cities to operate. And of course, no funding comes with any of this. This is all on the backs of local government, local cities. And this is absolutely ridiculous. A $18,500 fine for this, when we had the problem corrected within an hour. Boy, this is unbelievable. But I understand we have to do it. So, because it's St. Paul and they're telling us what we have to do. So, Councilmember Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm glad you brought that up, and I just want to add that that's an unelected office, MPCA.
Correct.
And we have many of them unelected offices dictating statutes and rules and regulations that evidently go through the legislature, but they're out there on their own creating fines and trying to justify their office, I guess.
Next, we have thank you. Next, we have Comprehensive Civic Center Master Plan Consultant Services. Our Public Works Director, Mr. Christensen.
Mayor, members of council, if I may, really quick, back to the other one, do you want this to go to the next regularly scheduled council meeting for decisions on both payment and location of that?
I won't be at the meeting, so Councilmember Nelson can take care of that. Yes, that'd be good to come to the next meeting.
Okay.
Way to pass the buck, right?
Yeah, I think so.
It could
Mr.
go
Christensen.
tonight, I suppose, if you want, but.
I'm sorry?
It could go tonight, I suppose, if you want, but I'm not necessarily recommending that. It's up to you.
Might as well.
Council, I've got two heads nodding yes.
We have to pay the fine. The only question is where to pay it from. We haven't talked about that.
Well, you could, Mr. Okens, we could certainly take that out of Public Works budget. They have some unfilled positions there, if nothing else. Or Mr.
Mayor, if I may,
Public Works Director Christensen?
if it would allow us some time to potentially find sources available, those 2 weeks might be helpful.
It's fine. Just let it go.
Okay, we'll delay it for 2 weeks. Next, we have coordination of the Civic Center master plan proposals. Our Public Works Director, Mr. Christensen.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. As you'll recall, we advertised a request for proposals in May of this year, for consultant services to develop a comprehensive civic center master plan, and would include the analysis of the existing civic center complex and facilities, the land, the physical plant operations, and in order to provide and prioritize needs for modernization, replacement, and growth. The goals of the master plan include evaluating the strengths and weaknesses of the facility and to project the city's needs over the next 20 years. Evaluation is needed for the suitability and rehabilitating existing facilities or designing new ones, to correct current deficiencies and promote efficiencies through organization and proximity of related tasks. An additional goal is to evaluate the existing and potential future facility building structures to serve current and future needs for civic center, curling, additional locker room space, refrigeration plant, field house, indoor track, indoor turf fields, and additional sheets of ice, to name a few. Cost estimates are to be requested, or were requested, and make the necessary improvements and evaluate the phasing options. Proposals were submitted from by three firms, and reviewed and evaluated by staff selection committee, with 292 Design Group of Minneapolis chosen as a recommended firm for the project at an estimated cost of $47,375. Alternates, of course, council would be to seek a different firm for the project or to delay the project further, the study further.
Okay, council, any discussion on this item? Councilmember Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Do we need to spend this money on this presently? Is that something we can do later on? I mean, we do a lot of consultants, and this is another $47,000. And we got consultants' ideas on a shelf at City Hall, many of them. And I'm wondering, is this the proper time to be doing this? I know that we need the refrigeration addressed out there, definitely, but is it the proper time to be looking at, curling, additional locker room space, field house, track, indoor turf fields, and we're searching for money for refrigeration? Man, I'm questioning that.
I think one of the things I think is that, we want to make sure that we get the right ice-making equipment.
Yep.
And so when I had talked with staff in regards to this, and Mr. McGuire, I had asked that we take a comprehensive look, rather than just look at where we are today and what'll fix it next week, to look at where we're going to be long-term. And so we brought that back to council. We asked council for direction on that, and then we said, yeah, go ahead and let's get some numbers and bring it. So that's why this is coming back to us now, is that we want to make sure that when we look at that complex, we look at what it's going to look like. We don't want to put in a cooling plant to take care of the immediate needs, when all of a sudden a year from now, we come back and say, well, we want X or we want Z, either an additional sheet of hockey ice or an additional sheet of curling ice, or whatever the case might be. So I think the timing is appropriate. I think the timing is right. Do I like to spend $47,000 on a consultant? Absolutely not. But I certainly don't want to spend $4 million on an ice plant when we could have gotten it done for 2.5. So I think we have to be responsible, and I kept asking staff this question, and they kept telling me, Mr. Mayor, with all due respect, until we have somebody come and look at it, we can't just tell you. And so it's up to the council at this point as to whether you want to move forward with this and keep the project moving, but we have to do something with ice next year, is my understanding. So our Public Works Director, Mr. Christensen.
I might add, Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Christensen, to your point, the refrigeration plant is already we're proposing that in the CIP next year, regardless of what happens with this particular fund or this particular project. The study would be the complex as a whole. The refrigeration system is virtually designed, has already been preliminarily designed, and will be what we need for that building for 2 sheets of ice. All we have to decide there is, should we build it or design it for a potential 3rd sheet in the future? This is more of a site-wide or more comprehensive look at the entire area. So I see them as 2 separate projects. Obviously, if you have separate buildings and need separate ice plants, that's different. But we're proposing the refrigeration system in the CIP separate from this study. I'll also add that this was not funded in the current budget, and so there will have to be a budget amendment for this amount of funds for this study.
So I'm going to try to get some clarification. So did you agree with me or disagree with me?
Yes. I agree that the study should be done, but I disagreed in that we need to do the study prior to the refrigeration system.
Councilmember Schwantes.
I think it really hinges on whether or not we expect to do something with local option sales tax, because our time to move with that is going to be here before we know it. So if we are doing local option sales tax, and is there a component of that that we would expect to be out at the Civic Center? And if so, then I think that we need to have the study done so we know what we're talking about and we can have that plan and that vision for the future.
Councilmember Fagerly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Have we heard back from the curling club, what they're planning on doing?
They're waiting on us.
Mr. Holland, do you have a report on that?
Mayor and council, I received a letter from them last week, and they wanted an update, and so I was waiting until after this meeting to see if we're going to proceed with plans. When I met with them, I told them that we were looking at developing a master plan for that facility, and through that master plan, that would ultimately give us a guide on whether we would be looking at, helping them out with their, association and some of their, desires for, the facility. So depending on what's stated tonight is what I'll deliver back to them. I know that they're trying to make a decision within the next 90 days themselves.
Well, I thought we already agreed we were going to give them land for $1 and then to use the parking lot. So I don't know what else there is.
I wasn't part of that decision if that was made previously. I don't know about that.
And then they said, well, we're going to look at Spicer. And I told them at the community development, we're not getting into a bidding war. This is our proposal for you. Take it or leave it. So I haven't heard anything back for 6 months, so.
They did not express to me when I met with them about 3 or 4 weeks ago that they would, interested in, building their own facility. So taking that land for $1 and using the parking lot, they didn't express any opinion to do that.
They don't want to do that now then?
They didn't express it to me.
Okay.
Councilmember Nelson, followed by Councilmember Meske.
I think the curlers brought us to the reason to do this study. We're looking at an ice plant. We made a commitment and said we want to keep the curlers in Willmar. We could give them or look at a specific location, but is that what the facility needs long-term with that? In addition to the ice plant, I believe the next 4 years have what is it, the total would be between $4 and $5 million in capital improvement plans that were being requested to be done there. So I think this is a perfect time to do that study to see if we're spending money out there, what will we have and will it serve this community for the years to come? I think that, I'm disappointed it's taken us this long to get here, but I think things are that way. We need to make the right decision, and if we can look at local option sales tax, or if we should be looking at some other things. I think this is a step to look in that direction. So I think the curlers have been waiting on us. We've been waiting on them. I think they have been patient to see what we want to do and where the best location for them might be. How does that affect ice plants? How does that affect our other arenas? So I think this is what we had agreed to do, to try to find the best location and the best long-term commitment for the Civic Center and what else it might be out there.
I just want to clarify that the council approved going and asking for the request for quotes with the understanding it would come back for the approval at that time. But I just want to make sure that, we didn't commit to continue down the path. We committed to come to today to decide either to move it forward or to not move it forward. It's kind of where we came to. Councilmember Meske.
I don't know if we need to decide it today, but I say, as I'm looking at this, we did a facility study, and it gave us a layout of all of our buildings. Then we had a retreat where we said facilities were our top priority.
Right.
And we have a retreat coming up where we're going to look more into that. This seems like it's probably 2 weeks ahead of where it needs to be, but it's, because now you're saying, well, we want a master plan of the Civic Center. Well, why don't we have a master plan of the community center, master plan of the auditorium, master plan of the city offices? We haven't made those decisions of which of those are our top priorities and which ones may be in local option sales tax. I thought we were gearing up for a major facilities retreat to talk about just those topics. So it feels to me just slightly premature, but it does need to come here. Obviously, I just don't know where it is in the pecking order of priorities.
You're right. We did say that we wanted to prioritize. To Councilmember Fagerly's point, I believe it was October of last year when they came to your committee, wasn't it? And so, this got in process. I think this might have been in process
Or we've made it a priority.
before the first of the year. And so it's taken us this long to get to this point. We'd hoped to have this back in front of us in March. And if that would have happened, we would be past that. But now I understand what you're saying. We're going to have a planning retreat within the next month. So I guess where I'm at this point is, we need to decide as a council, do we want to continue moving this forward? Do we want to put it on the back burner until after we have our planning retreat? Or how do we want to handle that? Public Works Director Christensen, I think there's some times that we have some confusion as when I call on Councilmember Christensen, and so tonight you see me being very intentional on Councilmember Christensen and Public Works Director Christensen. So I'm doing that for the benefit of our listening public. So
I'm not partial to what you call me, that's fine.
we've been called a lot, haven't we? So where I'm at with it is if we put it on the shelf until after our planning retreat, does that have anything to do with any of our timelines in the understanding on the request for quotes that we received from this firm?
It absolutely does. Let me clarify. It would change their calendar, obviously, because they are planning on, well, all three firms actually anticipated starting as soon as we give the go-ahead. So if you push it 2 weeks or a month or whatever, my guess is you would push the end date, which was somewhere around the first of the year, that same timeframe.
Councilmember Nelson.
The other concern I have is I believe this study needs to be done before we commit to an ice plant, because I think if we're going to make changes to the Civic Center, they should be incorporated into what we're going to do with the ice plant. And we are on borrowed time with the ice plant, and that needs to take place next year. And so I think it is critical, along with the commitment that we've made to the curlers, to look at the best location for them in our community. And so I think you're right. This should have been done in March. It's not, and now is the time to do it. Does it fit in with everything else? No. But that's kind of been our life right now. So I think we need to move forward with this and look at what's best to do out there before we start spending $250,000.
So I'm sitting here in the middle, and I'm not hearing clear consensus on what we want to do, folks. So, Mr. Scott, I'm going to look for some advice here. can I take a straw poll to see if this wants to be moved forward, or if we want to just let it die on the vine, or can I not do that?
There's nothing to prohibit you from voting in this meeting, which is basically a regular meeting, other than your policy saying no vote. So I think if the council is comfortable taking a straw poll, then go for it.
So where I'm at with it is, what I'm seeing right now is I'm seeing about a 4-4 split is what I'm seeing, but I'm not sure that I'm reading that entirely correctly. So, Councilmember Osmus.
To help you understand where people are at, were you just waiting for people to weigh in?
Well, either weigh in or else give me some body language that gives me an indication on what direction we're moving.
Okay.
The body language at this point is telling me I think we're at a split. So if that's incorrect, you need to tell me, Mr. Mayor, you're wrong.
Well,
So-
I will just say that I think we need to do the study. I don't, for all of the projects that we have coming up and are looking forward with all the other infrastructure needs that we have, I think we have to do it intelligently, and we have to know what is the possibility for that structure. And I'm looking forward to a discussion about a local option sales tax. And if we don't know what the possibilities are, how can we even have that discussion? So I think we want to do, instead of piecemealing it, I think we have to do it with purpose and intention.
Okay. Councilmember Nelson.
I actually think we've messed around with this one long enough. Why don't we put it, see if people are willing to put it on the agenda tonight and vote? We're not going to learn anything new between now and 2 weeks from now.
Councilmember Maskey.
I would disagree. We're going to learn a lot more. We're going to learn where this council wants to put its priorities and then align it. Because right now, if you move forward with this, and I think the plan needs to be done if it is deemed one of the top facility priorities of the council. Because by doing this now, what you've just did is if we move forward with this master plan, what you're telling me is that the most important facility that we have is the Civic Center. And the most important priority is getting new ice, because that's what I'm hearing right now. And I'm not convinced that that's where we sit as a council. Forcing this to have a vote because that's been sitting there for a while seems like it's a wedge that's unnecessary, because I think we're going to have a retreat where we're going to talk about exactly which of these facilities are our top priorities, and now we'll have a quote, and this quote may be off in 2 weeks or a month or whenever that retreat happens. But just because we've been running and making decisions that are amok in the past does not mean that we can't right that ship at this point and do things in a logical progression that makes sense.
One more.
Councilmember Nelson.
I don't disagree with you. I'm coming from the standpoint of, we have no choice but to do the ice plant. If we do the ice plant without taking the time to figure out what that facility needs to be, that is an issue for me. Having this study done maybe opens the door to some type of funding that will help us to do other things, or maybe opens the door to local option sales tax, or maybe opens other things. So it doesn't make it the most priority out of our buildings, but it is a building that has been on the CIP for a long time, and we have to do something with the ice, and I think we have to come to terms with what we want that building to be before we invest that $250,000 in it.
Okay, I'm going to take some mayoral privilege if no one else wishes to speak. Or did I see Councilmember Christensen's hand going? I'm sorry, Councilmember Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If we're going to pursue the local option sales tax in 2018, the next general election, we should have our retreat, do our priorities, then we'll know what needs to be in that. And like Sean said, if we're doing this tonight, that means this is number one. And we haven't discussed number 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm not so sure this is number one. The ice definitely is, but as far as field house and curling and all this other stuff, there's things that should come before that. To me, in the city of Willmar, other facilities that probably need upgrading and fixing. And so I would agree with Sean that we should hold this off and do it at the retreat. Let's get our priorities. And then 2 or 3 weeks isn't going to matter on this. It's not going to matter. I don't think, at least.
Okay, unless I see something strongly from the council to the contrary, we will delay this decision until further down the road. I don't believe there's consensus of the council to move this forward. If I'm in error of that, somebody correct my ways. Councilmember Fagerly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There might be some other people we have to talk to about this, because there's a group out at the school that has some big plans. And they had plans for some of the land at the Civic Center.
Right.
I filled in for one meeting that you couldn't attend, but I think Councilmember Alvarado is a member on it. They were talking about local option sales tax too, and I said, well, if the city's doing one, we have money that we need. Can't just do it for their projects. And they're talking about a football stadium, soccer fields out there, moving the softball fields, and that's a whole lot of money. We got to do the ice at the Civic Center, and I've heard, yeah, put a new system in, and it'll cover the 2 sheets, and then it'll work for curling, and I've talked to the people who know curling needs a different type of ice, so we need help.
And that was the reason for the study?
Yeah.
Okay. Councilmember Nelson.
That's exactly, all of these conversations is exactly why we committed to do this study, what, 6 months ago or longer? So that, I mean, all we're doing is taking a step back and you know, we're not committing to do it. We have to commit next year to doing the ice.
Correct. I think Councilmember Nelson, I think we all understand what you're saying. We understand your interest in this project and wanting to move it forward, but it doesn't change the fact that I'm not seeing consensus here. And unless, again, I know where you're at, I know where Councilmember Christensen is at, I know where Councilmember Meske is at, and I know where Councilmember Osmus is at. And I see it that we have a split here. And we can continue to talk about this tonight, but we're not going to resolve it tonight. We need more information. That's the way I see it.
But
Councilmember Alvarado.
aren't we asking for help by having this study to give us priority or give us a vision? We talk about little pieces. You know, we talk about the ice plant, we talk about that and this, but don't we need some help focusing in what the vision is going to be for this property? And I don't feel that getting expert advice is a good way to go. I would think that part of their process would be trying to bring the parties together to figure out what we want so that we have a vision. I like the idea of moving forward. Just because they provide us the vision, does that mean we have to go with it? No. That's my thoughts.
Public Works Director Christensen, is there anything that you need more clarifying questions or answers on from the council, or? On this issue?
Oh, no, I think what I'm hearing is to bring this back for approval after you ask for it again.
Correct. After we have our planning retreat is what I'm hearing. I'm hearing there's agreement to bring it back after we have our planning retreat to discuss it, to either lift it up or vote it down. The concern I have right now is if we move it to council right now, I think it's going to get voted down. And if we don't, then we have an opportunity to prioritize. And if this comes to the top of the list, as Councilmember Meske and Councilmember Christensen have said, if it comes to the top of the list, we can revisit it. But, I mean, that's what I'm hearing, and that's what I want to keep it moving. I don't want it to die tonight and then never come back. I don't want it to get voted down tonight, so.
You don't even have to address Sean Christensen at all. There's nothing wrong with the proposal. I totally understand it. It's the timing of it in conjunction with the council. And I wouldn't disagree with Councilmember Alvarado either. Whatever the facilities we think are the top priorities, we're going to need help with any of them.
Right.
You know, if you were to say, we're going to spend $50,000 on all of our facilities to do master plans, then they would all have the fair shake, and I'd say, let's do that. But the fact of the matter is, we haven't done that. It's our business is what's holding this up, in my estimation. We need to take care of our business, and there's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing for him to answer, I don't believe. He's done everything we've asked him to do. It's our own failure to come up with priorities of, but at least we've said facilities, so at least we're in the game now. But we need to get that nailed down. So I thank you for putting it together. I just wish we had better answers for you now.
Councilmember Nelson.
I have to respect the wishes of the council, but I will tell you that I fear that we're taking a step back, that we could lose the curlers. I don't see supporting the putting in ice until we know where the ice plant should be, and it has to be done. I was at the League of Minnesota Cities meeting last week, and I had the privilege of going to see the new center that Rochester has built with local option sales tax called 125 Live. It is a combination, an amazing facility. I'm not saying that this needs to be at the Civic Center. That's not mine, but between a senior center, exercise, arts, the ice arena, a facility that they built using local option sales tax. And I'll tell you what, it will take us to think outside of the box to decide what needs to be done in this community with our facilities. We've got a group meeting that wants to do soccer. We've got a group meeting that wants to have a, all of that. All we're doing right now is waiting a few more months, a few more weeks, whatever, to start the process to look at this. And if we spend $250,000 to simply put the ice back in the same location at the Civic Center without looking at what that facility needs to be, that is going to be a mistake in my book. So I'm disappointed that we're choosing to do that. I think all of our facilities are a priority right now. We just need to be brave enough to be able to be creative.
Next on the agenda is Rural Service District. Mr. Okens. Finance Director Okens.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this issue came before the committee due to Candiway County notifying the city of Willmar that the city of Willmar's rural service district rate was considered low for quite some time. Included in your packet are the ordinances. The rural service rate of 1% has been in existence since 1968. And so finance staff was given this task due to a couple reasons. First, the assessing department had been moved to Candiway County. I think thus the notification from Candiway County that we look at this. There is a statute that talks about rural service districts and urban service districts. The difference between the two is the tax rate that they pay. It doesn't, any increase in one or decrease in the other does not generate any more revenue. It just shifts or reallocates the amount that is paid by which district it is. Up on the screen is a map. The outlined red areas are the rural service districts in the city of Willmar, primarily agricultural in nature. There were two ordinances that the council considered earlier this year. One was setting the rate. The other was an annual requirement to certify which parcels qualify for the rural service district. The council took action to certify the parcels that were brought forward and tabled the action on setting the rate until further information could be obtained. We have contacted the League of Minnesota Cities, a number of surrounding communities as well as counties to gather information on what other communities are doing in regards to rural service districts. There were two methods that were primarily found to exist. One was to use a percentage of the city's rate. Sometimes the percentage had a cap of no less than the surrounding township. Sometimes there was a percentage that was just kind of randomly chosen. The statute kind of indicates that the calculation should be based on the benefit of the parcels of tax funded services that the city provides. The second method was the surrounding township rate. That seemed to be the most prevalent method used. We did not, we included in your packet a list of regional centers at the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. Not all returned our request for information. We also contacted Redwood County, Meeker County, Stearns County, the surrounding counties around Willmar to see how they handle it. Most of the parcels that you see there are on the fringe of the city limits. And so if those parcels were to ask for detachment or asked to go out of the city limits due to any kind of policy change to the rural service district rate, they would be paying the township rate that they would detach to, and all of those parcels would go back to Willmar Township. There are 3 parcels that are actually platted. The pointers. I guess I may be too far away. This parcel right here in the upper northwestern part of the community is a platted development that is undeveloped and being farmed presently. The one directly north of the church on 7th Avenue Northwest is platted as well as this parcel down in the southeastern part of the community, which lies behind the AG Church. The three sections that I talked about are platted parcels, and according to statute, when they are platted, should actually not be included in a rural service district because the intent is the development. Some of them have services already, some do not. And so the 2 recommendations that we have included in your packet, the first one would be to direct the city attorney who worked on these 2 ordinances, it has to be changed by ordinance, to take the parcels that are platted and remove them from the rural service district due to the fact that they are platted and do receive city services more than other agricultural land due to improvements to the property as well as the intent. And the second would be direct the city attorney to amend the rural service district rate from the 1% that has been in place since 1968 to the surrounding township rate.
Okay, council, do you agree with that, to move forward to the council, next councilman, Councilman Meske?
I do agree with it. What are the township rates? Is that what I'm looking at on, there's some highlighted pieces?
Councilman Meske, page 34 of the 47 pages that were included in there does show you the township rates. And so you see Willmar Township would be 11.094, I believe.
Right. I guess my concern is going from a 1% to an 11% in a year, and what will that do to the taxpayers' rates?
The county auditor indicated to me that they did a recalculation and that it would shift less than $10,000 from the urban district to the rural district collectively.
Okay.
Okay, I'm seeing consensus to bring it to the next council meeting. Next, we have First Street redevelopment proposal. Planning and Development Director, Mr. Peterson.
Mayor Kelvin, members of the council, the city recently received a proposal for redevelopment of a number of properties on First Street. This project that's being proposed would consist of retail, professional businesses, and at least one eating establishment. The property in question, and you've got this map digitally, it's not up on the board, but you have it in your council packet. It's the property that lies south of the fire station on both sides of First Street. The map has been changed since we since it was sent out to show that the one residential property that is on Minnesota Avenue on the east side of First Street, and then the two vacant lots on First Street on the east side would be considered for part of that district. The properties in question have historically been underutilized. A number of structures on those blocks have been demolished over the years and most recently been used for overflow event parking or commercial parking for businesses that need the additional space. The owner demolished those properties in anticipation of future redevelopment. The property on the east side of First Street is currently only partially occupied. There are still two businesses that operate from that site, but the site is underutilized. As I mentioned, the developer has approached the city of Willmar with this project and has requested tax increment financing assistance due to the extreme cost that occurred in the demolition of the structures on the west block. The structures that were removed were substandard and were a visual and functional detriment to the entire First Street corridor. The request for tax increment financing is to offset the cost of demolition and site preparation incurred by the current owner, which is being reflected in the sales price to the developer. Recommendation is to pursue the creation of a redevelopment tax increment financing district to support the project on the west side of First Street. And by creating this district, it also lays the foundation of the groundwork for the redevelopment of the east side properties. It's important to remember that a significant amount of expense has already been incurred in acquiring and demolishing structures on these properties. It's unlikely that in this market, any arm's length transaction can occur for the sale and redevelopment of the properties that would generate any type of return for a developer. This is a classic example of when tax increment financing is warranted, specifically a redevelopment district. Some initial tax increment financing financial runs have been performed, and it looks like in order to make the project feasible, it would require approximately 14 or 15 years for the length of the district. Staff would work with the developer to minimize the amount of tax increment financing assistance that is provided to ensure that the public's interest as well as that of the developer are being protected. Without the use of tax increment financing, it's doubtful that the city will see anything other than vacant property at that site. The market returns in our local economy will not support the development of land with those values and costs associated with it. Under the proposed TIF project or TIF plan, the city, county, and school district would continue to collect the base level of taxes from the properties. What would be given up would be the increased taxes for a period of years yet to be finally determined. And as I mentioned, some financial estimates would be available, and again, it looks like it takes 14 or 15 years to make this project feasible. At this point, because of the desire of the developer to really move this project along, he's very interested in doing something significant on First Street. The alternatives are to pursue the creation of a tax increment financing district or to deny the use of TIF for the project. If that's done, I can assure you there will not be a project. So the but-for question has pretty much been answered. It's a recommendation of staff that the council at some point hopefully moved ahead to the full council agenda tonight. That the council would direct staff to proceed with the drafting of a tax increment financing plan and the establishment of a tax increment financing district for the proposed redevelopment project for a period of not to exceed 15 years.
Staff, council, have the desire to move this forward? Councilmember Christensen?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question. Do we know the assessed value presently and what it's going to be when this is done, so we know what the difference is going to be?
Right now, that property is carrying, well, strictly land values for the most of it on First Street. The other properties are carrying some values, and I believe Aaron's got those in the financial runs. This project will, Aaron, you got in your numbers there too, I can pull it out too, is this project is well in excess of $2 to $3 million, I believe.
Mr. Backman?
Yes, Marv, basically, the value of the investment would be between $2 and $2.5 million is what's being discussed. If you look at the values that are on the property that are on the west side, it's pretty modest right now in terms of the vacant land. So then by the time you're done with the total taxable market value after the project, it would be somewhere in the magnitude of $2.8 million.
Thank you.
So considerable difference. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Bruce, I want to thank you for bringing this project forward to us for consideration. I know there's a desire to move this forward in our conversation today to tonight's agenda. So is there agreement from council to move this forward to the consent or to the agenda for consideration this evening? Okay, Mr. Peterson will move that forward. Mr. Holland, can you make note of that, please? Next, we have the 6-month priorities for our city administrator. And 2 weeks ago, we rushed him in the process, and today we're going to rush him again. So, Mr. Holland, our city administrator, could you give us an update here?
Well, we had some issues with the packets 2 weeks ago, and so some of the council didn't get a chance to look at that list of items. And so hopefully you did get a chance over the last 2 weeks to look at that, and just to give you a chance to comment, or if you'd like to make an addition, or you think an item should be deleted, then I can do so. But basically, this is the list of items that I will be focusing on the next 6 months, and then there's an evaluation form that was included in there for your review.
Council, is there any feedback you want to give to Mr. Holland on this? Otherwise, we'll move forward with those items. Councilmember Meske.
I just want to ask you if you're okay with the evaluation form. Are these items that you feel are a fair assessment of a 6-month activity?
I did go through the document, and I think, yes, I agree it's fair.
Seeing nothing else to come before us in the work session, we will, I'm sorry, Mr. Peterson. I wasn't sure if that was coming here or the full council meeting, but it has to go to both, I guess, right? Let's talk about it now, please. Mr. Peterson?
The city of Willmar closed last week on Lot 1, Block 1 of Willmar Industrial Park 4th Edition. The property was sold to GM Development. In between the time of signing the purchase agreement and the closing of the sale, there was some additional soil borings conducted on the site that revealed some poor soil conditions in several locations that require excavation of 20 feet. The company proceeded with the closing with the understanding that a request for additional concessions would be brought to the council. And I told them that, I need no assurances on the part of the city that there would be any particular result from their proposal for additional concessions. They've asked that the city cover 50% of the $90,000 to $100,000 in anticipated additional soil correction. And just for your information, the net sale, what was banked last week, net sale was $270,600. Staff has not been able to independently verify that their estimated costs are accurate. I guess we've seen the soil reports and have no reason to contest those. It's a belief of staff that if the council wishes to grant concessions, it should be at a percentage of the additional soil correction with a not-to-exceed number and based upon submitted proof that the additional soil correction costs were in fact paid. The alternatives are to grant the financial concession for the soil corrections or to not grant the financial concession for soil corrections. And the motion I'd like to throw out in front of the council considers that the city grant a maximum concession of 50% of the demonstrated additional cost to correct the soil conditions, not to exceed $30,000, with those funds being paid from the Industrial Development Fund, and that would be upon them providing proof or evidence to the city of the additional costs that were actually incurred for the soil corrections.
Okay, council, this is a discussion item that we need to talk about. There were additional soil corrections that were needed in excess of 20 feet of soil corrections for this project. And it was brought to staff to ask the council if they would consider something like this. And then if that is what the desire of the council is, it'd be best to move that forward to the agenda as well. There are comments from the council. Councilman Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is that 20 feet deep, talking? Couldn't they use some concrete piers? I mean, or is that what they're going to do?
I know that was talked about. I don't know if that's what we're going to do or not. Mr.
We
Peterson?
talked about a variety of alternatives, and the alternative that seems to make the most sense out there is a compacted rock pier where they auger holes and compact rock into the ground and use that as a base for their footings.
That's $100,000 worth?
Roughly 90 to 100 is what they've had for an estimate.
Must be a big building.
It's 14, 15,000 square feet.
Okay. That's a lot of money.
Councilmember Fagerly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Was this part of the Shovel Ready program?
Belvin Councilmember Fagerly, yes, it was, and the soil borings that were done at scattered sites as part of the Shovel Ready program did not indicate any soils of this type. You can get about 60 feet away from the worst soils, and you've got totally stable building-bearing soils at a depth of 2 feet. It just points out the unpredictability of soils in this area.
Guess it really didn't pay to go in that program then.
Well, it did, because there's a lot more to it than just trying to guess at what the soils were out there. I mean, if we'd have done a complete analysis of soils out there, it would have cost thousands of dollars just to do borings, and that wasn't feasible.
So council, the request is to move this forward to the agenda so we can deal with this. Is there a desire by council to move it forward or not? They need to know this so that they can order the work to start the building project, and they are on a tight time frame on the construction. So, okay, Bruce, add that to the agenda as well. Mr. Holland, if you would, our city administrator, if you'd move that to the agenda. We're going to go into, we're going to adjourn, so we have a few minutes before we have the next meeting. Thank you.
Consider the right way to do that.
Sorry, yeah.